Hi there, and welcome to this edition of the NGINX Community Chats. Today, we're going to be coffee clatching on data, something very different for us here, and its impact on projects and open source. From the German, Coffee Klatch means coffee and gossip. And as that name implies, this is a very casual conversation. During this, you'll get a chance to hear about some things that are informative, maybe entertaining, maybe even learn something. And you'll meet some of the people behind the scenes here at NGINX and F5, and even in open source itself. So with that, I'd like to introduce my guest today, Kathleen Crowe. Kathleen, what do you do here at NGINX?
Hi, thanks for having me. My title is Director of Data Science, which doesn't actually begin to cover it. Mostly what I'm doing these days is working to make our data usable by a lot of people, not just the scientists on my team, but customer success and the product managers and some of the engineers and my boss. So it's all about all the things you need to do to make data useful, not just sitting there.
Yeah, I have a background and degree in statistics, so data is near and dear to my heart, even though no one ever pays any attention to me. The most attention I've ever gotten, literally, is I do a talk on how to lie with statistics. And that is absolutely one of the best talks that I've ever given in my life. I will gladly give that one a drop of a hat. But you come in here and you're working with something from a data viewpoint. What's that like with NGINX, given that it's both an open source project and a commercial project?
Well, it's really interesting. NGINX, the whole suite of products, has been on this journey of making sure we're collecting a lot of data about our products, how they're being used, how they're performing. And so it's kind of a weird backdoor way that I'm learning about the products themselves, is I'm learning about them by means of the data that they generate. Which is fun and probably a little bit backwards, but it also helps me. It's getting me to a point where I understand how we can start better building our products and providing things that our customers and our community care about.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because we constantly struggle over here on the open source project side and the community side for what metrics are useful for us. There are hundreds of metrics we could measure on an open source project, but honestly, it's probably 99% of them really don't provide us as a community team a lot of data. And likewise, when we measure a community, the same rules apply. Communities have a different set of metrics, and quite often they're a little bit on the nebulous side, and they can be a little bit harder to track. But that kind of leads to this thing. Data and the stuff that you're working on is actually becoming increasingly crucial to all of these activities, be they product, projects, whatever for this. So how could open source make better use of data?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think as a data scientist, which is really my background, as well, math, there's no such thing as too much data, right? You can always have more data, ideally good data, but data. And so the really superficial answer for open source is, well, collect more data, but that's not necessarily it's not necessarily the thing you can do. It's not necessarily the most efficient or the most productive way of doing things. I think that open source has a couple of slightly different nuances about what you have to think about when you're talking about collecting the data. One is that depending, of course, on your licensing and so forth, you need to think carefully about, if I collect this data and I use it, can I protect the data for my users, right? Because you're on an open source license. And the answer is yes, you can. You just have to pay attention to which license and how you've licensed the data. But the flip side to that is that if you figure out those protections, it gives you the chance to provide other people the opportunity to make contributions in this area. One of the hard things about being a data scientist, particularly in, let's face it, a little bit more niche areas, is coming up with good data sets and giving the grounding for a lot of different people to figure out what you can learn about this discipline. It's kind of easy with, like, it turns out healthcare data sets are fairly ubiquitous, but some other kinds of data sets, not so much. So there's this very be cautious, be responsible about how you protect the data, but then also some great opportunities, I think, to get more insights from it and have people with different lenses on the questions work on them.
Again, my background statistics and math, among other things here. But for instance, occasionally I see the data overload making it possible for people to get what results they want to out of it. Sort of data dredging models or just false correlations. My favorite false correlation of all times, by the way, is, did you know that there is a Pearson's coefficient of 0.97 between beer sales and marriage? So does drinking cause marriage, or does marriage cause drinking? So I kind of worry about this. So how do people, what's sort of the magic bullet of where people can actually get useful and meaningful data and actually have it come to an analysis and conclusion?
So it's interesting. This conversation has now gone on twice just today. And the specific point of the conversation has been, you need to think about the questions you're going to try to answer before you start building the feature or generating the data. So this is truly twice today already, and the day is young. We've had this conversation with different groups about, all right, remember that as you build this feature, you are going to, at some point, you're going to want to know if it was a good feature. Was it successful? That is not the time to start thinking about what the metric is for success. Now, as you are imagining the feature, is when you should be saying, and if people really like this, that I would expect to see this quantified behavior. And so I don't think there's a magic bullet in the sense of one particular thing you should always measure, but there is a sort of magic framework, which is plan in advance, right? Data scientists, the worst possible position we get put in, one of them, is somebody comes to us and says, hey, our feature just went live. Can you tell us how we're doing? No, because we didn't actually instrument it to be able to answer those questions. And so it's really the framework, it's the mindset of planning for the data from the moment you start planning everything else.
Very cool. Yeah. I have a pet peeve. We're heavily on GitHub, of course. We've got like 89, 91. I think there's more than that now, open repos on GitHub. And everybody always loves to quote GitHub stars as a meaningful metric. My argument is that GitHub stars are a measure of longevity, not of success. Since they never time out, they never go away. The older your project are, the more stars you've got. So I've had a chance to work with you now on a couple of different hackathons here, and we've had some interesting discussions and so forth, but your guidance on judging has actually proved really instrumental in where we are with hackathons. So what do you find is most helpful in helping people who are running hackathons when it comes to judging?
So I should point out that these two hackathons, these are really the first times I have gone through the build a scoring rubric set of things. I think that my answer to what's the most important thing or what's the helpful hint here is the same one I just said for designing features in a product, is figure out up front what it is you're going to measure, right? So we've gone through this exercise with the hackathon of what are the important categories and how do we define them? How do we say for this category, there are these three ways we're going to measure and they mean these things? That's kind of like planning out a feature for a product and saying, all right, how are we going to tell if that feature was successful? So it's weirdly enough, I think, to me, in my head, it's the same exercise both times.
Yeah, and I've watched this, and I think there's also a natural adjustment from judging to stop going, oh, well, I think it's cool, to being able to put a quantifiable measurement to it. I've done a lot of hackathons, the two that we've worked on, but a number of outside ones. And it's very seldom that we come forward with a set of criteria that says, this is what we are measuring for, rather than this is what we discovered after. So I think that's actually really a good advice to everybody that's out there who may be taking part or building a hackathon.
Well, I will point out that before coming into industry years ago, I was a math professor. So I taught math for a lot of years because I started teaching when I was like 17. And one of the things is I started owning my own classes and really having responsibility start to finish was coming up with ways of evaluating the students that were, you've heard me say this in hackathon conversations about orthogonal dimensions.
Mhm.
Like, don't ask the same question 5 times with slightly different flavors, because now all you've learned is 5 times can they do this, and you've missed the other dimensions of knowledge. And so it's kind of built on years and years of how do you really evaluate it if students gained the body of knowledge you needed them to gain. You have to make sure you've covered all the strong dimensions. And that's kind of also what was going on with the hackathon rubrics.
Yep. Cool. That's actually really cool. Okay. Shifting topics on you here. I understand you have a background with US rowing. So what do you do and what's that like?
Yeah, so I row competitively. I'm a master's rower. Master's in this
Wow.
case means age, not skill. Just got to point that out. But I've been doing it for a long time. I am also a U.S. rowing official. So I'm one of the referees out at regattas. I'm also a world rowing umpire. So I also officiate at international events. I've been doing that a while, which is kind of goes with yes, and I made it to be a world rowing umpire. And it's largely it's kind of a way, if you grew up in a sport, like I grew up as a swimmer, and if you paid any attention through all those years, you realize that there are a bunch of people allowing you to do this cool thing that you like doing, right? Your parents and other volunteers and all these people.
Yep.
And a lot of us then tend to hit a point where we say, well, how do I give back? Now, admittedly, I'm giving back to rowing, not swimming, but how do I give back in a way that sort of continues on with making opportunities available? So I ended up as a rowing official. I'm actually also the coordinator for one of the big regions in the country. So I spend a lot of time staring at a calendar and counting up referees and shuffling them around like playing cards. So.
Wow. Yeah, I have sort of, and I hate to say this, but you just nailed it over to the open source side. I have 2 basic rules: give credit where credit is due. If you stand on somebody's shoulders, tell them that you did. And the other one is a recurrent equivalent value. That doesn't mean return the same value. So the fact that you're working for rowing rather than swimming is still equivalent value. You're letting other people have a chance to enjoy a sport that they may not get a chance to do so as well. So, okay, we always ask our guests this question: what's your favorite non-work related open source project?
So I will have to say, so now we're going to branch off into another direction of things I do when I'm not at work. My favorite open source non-work project is a piece of software called MuseScore, and it is a music composition and notation software.
Cool.
That you can use for either composing your own music, or I've done a lot of arranging for, I used to sing with a particular a cappella group, and we had a weird, non-standard set of voice parts. And so it meant that we always had to do, we had to rearrange music to accommodate who we had. Let's put it this way, I was the highest voice we had. And so there was a whole lot of shenanigans on my part. And I was our arranger, which is how I got into this. And MuseScore is an open source version of stuff that I use.
Very, very, very cool. I think that's the first time we've heard that one. We've had a couple of repeats before, but that one sounds cool enough that everybody should go look it up for that. So, advice time. How would somebody that wants to start dabbling with data science get started?
I have become a big fan of spelunking through the Coursera catalog. There are courses, the whole range from intro to statistics to deep learning and generative AI. And what I would do is I would go in there and pick a couple of courses that are really sort of broad overview. And even if what you want to do is get your hands dirty, like building the models, go look at the one that's like AI or data science for executives, or, those. The ones where you're like, well, they're not going to talk about any data there. They will. And what they will do is give you the overview of the kinds of questions you're trying to answer. So rather than diving in and saying, ooh, I can use these Python libraries, start with the understanding at the high level of what it means to be a practitioner in this discipline, the kinds of questions you want to answer, and then start chasing the tracks of the things that get you to answer the questions. A lot of being a data scientist is being, this is self-serving because this is how I was trained. A lot of being a data scientist is being an interdisciplinary applied mathematician, meaning you have to be able to take questions from people who really, really don't want to talk to you about statistics. And you have to get them quantified. You have to study them and come up with answers. And you have to be able to say those answers back in ways that similarly don't involve a lot of statistics. And so learning how the questions are formulated and what people care about is an important part of being a data science practitioner. So you might as well start it early.
Wow, cool. Well, Kathleen, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing insights with us and our viewers. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us as well today and meeting some of the people behind open source here inside of NGINX. If you've got comments, questions, or your own ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, may the open source be with you.